This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. South Korean lawmakers questioning cabinet ministers over President Yoon's botched martial law, while a police raid on his office is blocked by security guards. Now, Taiwan urges China to halt all provocative acts, asserting that Beijing's heightened military activity around the island proves its role as a troublemaker. And amid rising regional tension, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd is in Tokyo, lauding stronger military ties with Japan and Australia during joint drills to showcase enhanced cooperation. And investors watch for signs of new stimulus to boost growth and consumption in China as Beijing's top leadership gathers for an annual economic meeting. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, Han Kang, the first Korean and Asian woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature, takes a stand against violence. We delve into her achievements with an expert. And a once bustling street lined with pubs and bars in South Korea, now a shadow of its past. What's behind the country's waning drinking culture? Pressure mounting on South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol as lawmakers lay the groundwork for another impeachment motion against him. The main opposition Democratic Party has scheduled a voting session this Saturday. And police have ramped up investigations into Mr. Yoon's botched martial law declaration last week. They have raided the presidential office to seize records related to cabinet meetings held just before the martial law declaration. Investigators were able to gain access to his civil services office, but the entrance into the main building was blocked by the presidential security guards. According to local media, the president's security team was not told about the search beforehand. Mr. Yoon was also not present at the time. Investigators were also sent to the National Police Agency, the Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency, and the National Assembly Police Guards to gather evidence on how events unfolded on Tuesday night last week. A former defense minister, Kim Yong-hoon, is currently being held in a protective cell after an unsuccessful suicide attempt while in detention. Authorities say his condition remains stable. Mr. Kim was formally arrested alongside other officials on charges of insurrection and abuse of authority. Now, he is believed to have instigated the president to impose emergency rule. The ex-defense minister is the highest-ranking official to have been arrested so far. And CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun Suk, she joins us live from Seoul. So Yun Suk, I believe the lawmakers are still in Parliament questioning the cabinet ministers over President Yoon's short-lived martial law. So what are some of the latest developments?
Well, yes, cabinet ministers have been inside the National Assembly for hours, being grilled by the lawmakers from both the ruling and the opposition parties about a cabinet meeting that took place before President Yoon Suk Yeol made that declaration of the martial law. Now, even the Prime Minister, Han Kang, was being in there. He had to offer an apology several times to the lawmakers there for not trying to stop President Yoon to carry out that martial law. And because of that, it seems like there was no time for this impeachment bill, the motion, to be filed by the opposition party. And so what we're hearing is that the motion bill will not be filed today, but instead will be filed tomorrow. But although experts here are saying that what is important is that the motion bill be put up for vote on Saturday as scheduled, and that's what the main opposition party says that they are planning to do. It seems like the motion bill won't go through in today as we had expected, but that isn't a problem. And as you said, we are also hearing that the police has not been able to go inside the presidential office despite reports that they had raided the place. Apparently, the police had arrived at the presidential office just before noon this afternoon. They were there for about 5 hours, but they were not able to enter the presidential office because of the presidential security officers. Now, the main opposition Democratic Party has criticized this, saying that the officers were obstructing the search of the presidential office and that they were simply protecting the mastermind behind the martial law, the insurrection, and not the head of the state.
So, Yoon Suk, even until now, the ruling party remains divided, right, over the potential impeachment of President Yoon, and no exit plan has been announced just yet. So, what exactly is at stake for Mr. Yoon's party?
Well, the ruling party has said a plan has been drafted where they said that he could resign in February or hold snap elections in April, or resign in March and then elections in May. Though at the moment, it's unsure if President Yoon is going to resign, as there are reports that he told his ruling party members that he would rather be impeached than resign so that he could start the legal actions also to defend himself. Now, at the moment, it looks like there's three scenarios that could be taking place. We're talking about impeachment, resignation, and also his arrest and suspension of duties. Now, the impeachment by the National Assembly, which at the moment looks very likely as more ruling party members have started to come forward saying that they think that the impeachment is the solution right now, since President Yoon doesn't want to resign. Now, the vote to impeach him will take place this Saturday, and if the vote is to impeach him does go ahead, then his duties will be suspended immediately. And the final ruling will be made by the Constitutional Court within 180 days. Now, when former President Nobel was impeached in 2004, it took the Constitutional Court about 64 days and about 91 days by former President Park Geun-hye in 2017. Now, if it doesn't pass the Parliament again this Saturday, then the main opposition party says that it will again put the motion bill, will follow this the week after. Now, the second scenario is the resignation scenario. Now, if President Yoon does resign, then a snap election will be held within 60 days. Now, according to the Constitution, the Prime Minister will then be taking over as acting head of state, except in this case, we have the main opposition party also trying to impeach the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Han Kang. Now, if he cannot take over, then according to the Constitution, it's the Finance Ministry, but he is also facing impeachment, and also the Education Minister. And so it's really very complicated now, and I don't think anyone out there really knows who will be the head of state if President Yoon resigns. Now, the third and possibly the only scenario left for him is the arrest and suspension of duties. Now, following the arrest of former defense Kim Yong-hyun and the other high-ranking officials here, many here are saying that President Yoon Suk Yeol could be next, since many here say that, yes, he was the mastermind behind the martial law that he declared. Now, though the presidential office was not raided today, it's very likely that, very soon the police will be going in there to try and seek all the evidence that they can against him. Now, if President Yoon is arrested and put behind bars, according to some of the law professors that I've been talking to, he could still rule the country because he is still the head of state, unless he is formally charged. And also, unless President Yoon himself says that I am unable to perform the duties as head of state. And so, with all these three options out there, everyone's wondering which option President Yoon is likely to take. Very difficult to tell right now, but, with the possibility of the ruling party members voting in favor of this impeachment this Saturday, it's very likely he could be impeached. Then we'll see the Constitutional Court reviewing this for 180 days. And then if they do also find him guilty and impeaches him, then we'll see a presidential election being called for here in South Korea within 2 months. And so, in the next few months or so, I think it's just going to be a lot of chaos and still a very unstable South Korea.
That's right. So many scenarios that can possibly play out. Thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Lim Yun Suk speaking to us live from Seoul. North Korea, meantime, has broken its week-long silence on the political turmoil in the south. Well, state media KCNA said that South Korea is in chaos after President Yoon Suk Yeol imposed martial law. It falsely claimed that authorities in Seoul unleashed guns on the people. Well, it said that Mr. Yoon's, quote, insane act was reminiscent of the coup during the military dictatorship decades ago, and that the incident has exposed vulnerabilities in South Korean society. Well, the article focused on a series of protests joined by more than 1 million people calling for the president's impeachment. It described the situation as a growing social unrest in the South. President Yoon declared martial law last week, saying that it would safeguard South Korea from the threats posed by North Korea's communist forces. While many in South Korea are pressing President Yoon to step down, there are some who are actually protesting against his impeachment. And CNA's Grace Shin once again joins me to discuss the pro-Yoon rallies. So tell us all about that. What does it look like right now, those rallies, and who's mostly showing up for them?
As you mentioned, Otelli, while most of the rallies in South Korea are demanding President Yoon to step down, there are also pro-Yoon rallies going on in the country, and they're mostly made up of the nation's right wings or conservatives who are asking that President Yoon stays in office and suggest that impeachment would cost more than actually benefit the country. Now, to paint a bigger picture as to which parts of the public stands on impeachment, local pollster Gallup surveyed around 1,000 people, and out of the 1,000 people that were surveyed aged 18 and up, 71% of the respondents thought that President Yoon's declaration of the martial law was an act of treason. But the poll said that among those who are for the ruling and conservative People Power Party, 63% thought that President Yoon's decision to impose a martial law was actually not an act of treason. So more than half thought it was only fair for a president to be exercising such right, especially in the case of a national emergency. What's also worth noting here is that the older the respondents were, the more they were for President Yoon to be actually declaring a martial law. Now, specifically those aged 70 and up thought that President Yoon's decision was only reasonable. Now, these figures illustrate the political landscape in South Korea quite accurately because traditionally the older generation are thought to be in favor of parties with more conservative views, and there are also specific regions in the country that are filled with conservatives, and that's namely in the Gyeongsang province or parts in northern Seoul, like the Gangnam district. And these areas have been seeing a lot of protests going on, demanding that President Yoon not be impeached. But there's also been conservatives that have been for his early resignation instead. While they were not too hardlining on impeachment, they thought that though President Yoon's decision went against the Conservative Party's ideas, but they would still not want to see his impeachment, given that they thought it would cost them much more, based on what they've experienced back in 2016 with Park Geun-hye's impeachment as well.
Yeah, so it seems like the political landscape in South Korea has somewhat changed. But what's usually the conservative agenda? What is it usually like in Korea?
Well, for starters, the conservatives are much more pro-U.S. and pro-Japan. And as we could see from Yoon administration back in 2023, the Camp David summit, the trilateral summit between Japan, the United States, and South Korea, showed the epitome of where conservative stands. But usually how it's divided between conservatives and liberals is where they stand on North Korean issues. So conservatives are tilted towards living under the two Korea scheme rather than reuniting with our Pyongyang neighbor. Now, they're strong on heavier military spending as well, given that they believe that economically it would be better to live in two Koreas rather than one. Also, it's because many of the middle-aged and elderly population received anti-communist education in school. They remember constant military threat. They remember the anti-communist leaflets that they had to collect at school. So they lived at a time when North Korea was a pressing threat, and they were educated in school to think that way, which is why a lot of the conservatives, as I mentioned before, are usually constituted of the older generation. Now, because they experienced an active war, and they also realized they heard testimonials about active combat as well, military spending is a priority. But what's also worth noting this time around is that many of the conservative rallies or protests going on with traditionally right-wing heavy regions, even in those regions, those calling for President Yoon's impeachment said that though they are still for these conservative policies, whether it be hardlining with North Korea, preventing any anti-communist forces from entering, they do want to see a peaceful Korea, and that is to see political stability happen anytime soon. So we are to see what's going to be happening, and it's worth noting that there has been a slight change in tone as to what these conservative rallies are promoting for this time.
I appreciate you coming into our studio and sharing your insights. Grace Shin there.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we're going to go for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, China's policymakers gather for a closely watched economic meeting. Investors eyeing possible details of any step-up of monetary and fiscal easing as Beijing braces for a deepening trade war with the U.S. And Japan's Nippon Steel slams what it calls the inappropriate role of politics after reports suggest that U.S. President Joe Biden is planning to block its takeover of U.S. Steel. Hello again. You are just in time for your business update with none other than Roland Lim. So, Roland, let's first talk about China's annual economic meeting. Top leaders, I believe, they're gathering to hammer out all these plans after hinting at a more a forceful stimulus this week. What's that all about?
You heard right. Chinese officials will be focusing on setting the agenda for 2025. The annual Central Economic Work Conference is being closely watched by investors for signs of upcoming measures to kickstart growth. Observers say Chinese policymakers are likely looking to tackle soft domestic demand and to address a deepening trade war with the U.S. The gathering follows a meeting of the Politburo, that's China's top decision-making body, where officials called for strong support for consumers next year. Leaders also pledged a, quote, moderately loose monetary policy in 2025, marking a key shift from the prudent approach adopted more than a decade ago. Now, Beijing has in recent months unveiled a string of measures, including key rate cuts, easing of home buying restrictions, as well as trade-in programs in order to boost local consumption. President Xi Jinping says that the country is fully confident that it can achieve the annual growth target of around 5% this year. And CNA's Han Kang joins us from Beijing for more. Kang, thank you for joining us this evening. I know it's still early days yet, but what stimulus measures can we expect from this key economic meeting?
That's something we all want to know. What will be the details? And so this Central Economic Work Conference, it will set the tone for these economic goals that will be next year. This Central Economic Work Conference is crucial to watch out for this year because, as we know, China's economy is currently in a slump. So this conference will be held for 2 to 3 days. That's when leaders will review the current economic performance of this year, as well as set key priorities for next year. Now, the focus will be boosting demand, domestic consumption. We're also looking at bracing impact of potential U.S. tariffs next year and also trying to stabilize the property market. And so this Central Economic Work Conference typically happens after the Politburo meeting is the top decision-making body. Now, they met on Monday, that's December the 9th. They had pledged to have more proactive fiscal measures as well as moderately looser monetary policies. This term, moderately looser, was last used more than a decade ago in 2008 during the global financial crisis. Now, this conference is also happening after a slew of measures were announced in September. This includes interest rate cuts as well as more liquidity injection. During this slew of announcements, leaders had said that they're confident that they will be able to reach that GDP growth figure of around 5%. So all eyes will be on the Central Economic Work Conference. But I spoke to one analyst. He says that he's not optimistic that there will be more clarity or details during this Central Economic Work Conference. It's likely to repeat some details that were already announced during the Politburo meeting, which is the moderately looser monetary policy as well as the proactive fiscal measures. So he says that it's likely more of a wait-and-see approach. We may have to wait till next year's 2 sessions that's typically held in March to get more clarity on the economic measures. Nevertheless, the other government departments will hold their own work conferences at the end of this month once the Central Economic Work Conference closes.
Well, hopefully the investors here will be a little bit more patient. Thank you. CNA's Han Kang in Beijing. Let's take a look now at the Chinese markets. US dollar against the Chinese renminbi is currently weaker by 0.3% at that 727 level. This amid reports that Beijing may allow a weaker currency next year to combat the impact of higher US trade tariffs as US President-elect Donald Trump returns to the White House. China's sensitive currencies, the Aussie dollar, is weaker by 0.55%. against the dollar, and New Zealand dollar also weaker by 0.6%. Greater China markets trading cautiously as investors await concrete measures after policymakers promised bolder economic support. Major indices on the mainland in positive territory for the day, but in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index bucking the trend, ending the day nearly 0.8% in the red. Now, Tesla's electric vehicle sales in China for the first week of December notched their highest weekly figure in the fourth quarter of this year, with nearly 22,000 units sold. Now, the data release comes after Tesla reported that November was its best performing month in the Chinese market for this year. Sales last month exceeded some 73,000 units. Now, automakers in China have been ramping up discounts to meet annual targets before the year ends. Tesla, for one, has been offering a markdown for loans on its popular Model Y as it lost ground amid a BYD-led cost-cutting competition. Nippon Steel has slammed the influence of politics in its planned $15 billion takeover bid for U.S. Steel. Now, its remarks comes after reports emerged that U.S. President Joe Biden is looking to kill the sale on national security grounds once a review by its Foreign Investment Committee concludes later this month. The White House emphasized that Mr. Biden is waiting on the panel's recommendation. Japan's government said it's aware of the report. Nippon Steel said it is inappropriate that politics continue to outweigh true national security interests and added that its takeover will help counter threats posed by China. It also said it'll work with U.S. Steel and take all measures to achieve a fair conclusion. The deal was agreed by both firms about a year ago. U.S. Steel has said it needed to keep its plants in Pennsylvania open. Now, stakeholders also view the takeover as a way to enhance U.S. Steel's competitiveness on the world stage, especially against China. But the buyer has been battling fierce opposition. United Steelworkers Union is against the merger. Its leader said he was unconvinced that the deal will ensure the company's lasting success. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has also vowed to block the deal. Mr. Biden previously said it's vital for U.S. Steel to be domestically owned and operated. Nippon Steel is aiming to finish the deal by the end of this year. Korean Air has finalized its merger with its peer, Asiana Airlines. The flag carrier has moved the date forward on expectations that U.S. antitrust regulators would not object to the acquisition. The deal was first announced back in late 2020 to rescue the debt-ridden Asiana, whose financial troubles worsened after a plunge in travel demand during the COVID-19 pandemic. The merger was further delayed due to hurdles in gaining approval from competition watchdogs around the world. Now, Korean Air has since secured the green light from the necessary authorities and was waiting on a decision from U.S. regulators. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice only opposes mergers through lawsuits. If it does not object before the final payment today, the merger will be considered approved. Korean Air had to make significant concessions to get the go-ahead for its acquisition, and this includes surrendering routes, selling certain business units, and giving up airport slots. Many analysts say that the deal is still the net positive for the carrier. The combined entity, expected to create one of Asia's biggest carriers, it's estimated to rank at around 10th place globally in terms of fleet size and international flights. A complete consolidation is expected to take 2 years. The combined entity is set to face obstacles in streamlining its organizational structure and integrating mileage programs. Now, union workers from both airlines have been opposed to the merger, but Korean Air assured there will be no arbitrary cuts. The mileage scheme is widely expected to spark customer backlash, as Korean Air's points are typically valued higher than Asiana's. South Korea has reported stellar trade numbers defying expectations. Exports for the first 10 days of December surged by more than 12% from a year ago. A key driver was its semiconductor shipments, which soared some 43%. Demand for high-tech products was seen across its major trading partners. Total exports to the U.S. and China rose close to 20%, while those to the EU was up by more than 10%. The Trade Ministry now projecting this growth trend will likely continue for 15 consecutive months. The strong data comes despite the martial law chaos in the city, which caused disruptions in normal civilian functions as well as economic activities. Take a look now at the markets in South Korea. The Kospi ending the day about 1% high, Korean won around that 1,400 mark, strengthening against the dollar. And that'll do it for Business. We'll tell it.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korean author Han Kang picks up her Nobel Prize for Literature in Sweden in recognition of a poetic prose on trauma and human life. We'll be speaking with an expert to better understand her achievements. Hello there, you are watching East Asia tonight. South Korean police say that security guards are blocking a raid on President Yoon Suk Yeol's offices as part of an investigation into his failed attempt at imposing martial law. A former defense minister, Kim Yong-hyun, is currently being held in a protective cell after an unsuccessful suicide attempt while in detention. He's believed to have instigated the president to impose emergency rule. And Taiwan is calling on China to immediately stop all provocative acts. It says that increased Chinese military activity around the island shows that Beijing is a troublemaker. But China insists it will defend its sovereignty and not tolerate separatist activities. And as regional tensions rise, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd is in Tokyo, lauding stronger military ties with Japan and Australia during joint drills to showcase enhanced cooperation. Taiwan has called on China to stop all provocative acts immediately, saying that the increased Chinese military activity around the island shows that Beijing is a troublemaker.
中国这样的行径是对印太区域安全稳定现状的公然破坏，更是对国际社会投入不安的变数。
Taipei reported a sharp increase in Chinese military presence over the last 24 hours. 53 military aircraft and 19 naval vessels, including 11 warships, were detected near the island. Well, this marks the largest single-day incursion since October. China has hit back at Taiwan's accusations, saying that it will not tolerate separatist activities.
对台独分裂势力勾连外部势力谋独挑衅的动向，我们是高度警惕，绝不会听之任之。我们采取必要措施，坚决捍卫国家主权和领土完整，维护台海和平稳定，保障两岸同胞的根本利益。
Taiwanese officials have accused Beijing of using President William Lai's recent U.S. stopovers as a pretext for ramping up the military activity. Well, they've also described the drills as an attempt to draw a red line for the incoming Donald Trump administration. Well, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd says that Washington is monitoring the situation, insisting that the U.S. is maintaining its one China policy.
And certainly this latest activity, this is something that we'll continue to monitor and make sure that that nobody does anything to change the status quo in the Strait. Again, our policy hasn't changed. We'll continue to do what we can to help Taiwan acquire the means to defend itself.
Well, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd meantime, has also expressed confidence in the enhanced military capabilities with allies Australia and Japan. Well, he made the comments after observing a joint exercise dubbed Yamasakura 87 in the outskirts of Tokyo.
These are the types of things that will guarantee success for us if we ever get challenged on the battlefield. I am confident that we have the right capabilities, the right platforms, the right munitions, the right processes, but most important, we have the right people.
The U.S. defense chief is in Japan to reaffirm the importance of alliances and stress America's commitment to deter regional security threats. Now, his trip comes amid heightened concerns over Chinese military activity in the region, as well as concerns over the safety of the Osprey military aircraft, which is used by Japan's self-defense force. In other news, South Korean author Han Kang has picked up her Nobel Prize for Literature in Sweden. The Nobel Committee said that it chose to honor Han for her poetic prose on trauma and human life. Now, Han is the first Asian woman Nobel laureate in literature. The ceremony took place as her home country is in political turmoil after a brief declaration of martial law. In a Nobel lecture, Han spoke extensively of her novel, Human Acts. Now, the book focuses on an incident in 1980 when hundreds of pro-democracy students and civilians were killed or wounded by the South Korean military under martial law. The 54-year-old said she dedicated her award to those who oppose violence.
The work of reading and writing literature stands in opposition to all acts that destroy life. I would like to share the meaning of this award, which is for literature, with you, standing here in opposition to violence together.
And for more on Han Kang's amazing work, let's bring in Jenny Ramone, Associate Professor of Post-Colonial and Global Literatures at Nottingham Trent University. Well, thanks for joining us, Jenny. Let's just talk about Han Kang being the first Asian woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. That's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
It is, yes. And there's been lots of talk in recent years about the fact that an Asian woman had not won the Nobel Prize before. There had only been 18 women winners in the past. I think it's given a lot of confidence to the Korean and the wider Asian literary scene in the literary marketplace. There have been suggestions that people are going to be more daring in their prose, that the writing that will emerge from Asia, and especially from Asian women, will be perhaps more experimental, more truthful, in recognition of the experimental prose of Han Kang.
And tell us a bit more about Han Kang for those of us who might not be familiar with her work. Tell us about her life, her work, her style of writing.
Okay, well, she was born in 1970 and moved to Seoul as a young child. She was a poet primarily, and she taught creative writing at university. She gave that up just recently after becoming so globally successful. She's best known in the UK and in most of the English-speaking world for The Vegetarian, which is not really known as a political novel. It's seen as a feminist novel. It's about the decision by a woman to become a vegetarian, which is greeted with very different and extreme reactions by her father, her husband, and her brother-in-law. And her voice never appears in that text. So it's noticeable that her story is not told by herself. Other people tell her story. So in the UK, people don't really think of Han Kang as being a particularly political novelist, more of a feminist novelist. But actually, two of her works, which are the most political, are the novel that she discussed during her Nobel Prize speech and what is forthcoming in the UK, the novel We Do Not Part. And that's very interesting because it's been translated with lots of different titles all over the world. It's been published in French already as Impossible Goodbye or Impossible Adieu. And its name in Korean translates most directly to I Do Not Bid Farewell. Now, the kind of meaning of that title is lost really in the English translation, We Do Not Part, which sounds a little bit like a romantic story, whereas I Do Not Bid Farewell is a kind of comment about endurance, human endurance, and not giving up, continuing to respond to histories of violence. It's a novel about somebody who goes to the forest to look after a friend's bird in a hut in a snowy landscape, and they're trapped in the snow. So on one hand, it's about kind of human endurance and the ability to be resilient in contexts of everyday discomfort. But then they find documents and letters from the Jeju massacre of 1948 to 49. And reading these documents and letters creates a kind of a memory of that time. So the novel is about intergenerational memory and intergenerational trauma. It's about collective memory. And that's something that is a theme throughout Han Kang's work. And it's something that she has made reference to just recently. She's been asked to comment on the situation in South Korea, and she has talked about how it evoked memories for her of the Gwangju uprising in 1980. And that's a very common thing that happens when people have a kind of history of intergenerational trauma where their country or their community has a sense of collective trauma from the past. The events across different timelines and histories seem to fuse together, and they inform each other. And that seems to be how she responded to it. Her immediate response to the current declaration of attempted martial law was to think back to the previous time when that happened. And this is something that she talks about regularly when she writes about or talks about her writing. She talks about the way that she wants to capture the fragility, the contradiction, the impossibility of humanity and what it means to be human.
So, yeah, Jenny, I just want to pick up what you're saying that's very interesting there about how, I just want to pick up on another quote about somebody saying that her works have also been described as a conduit for memories of generations that suffered state violence. And I'm wondering, how do you think these writings, addressing these themes and the relevance, especially they hold in the context of today's political crisis?
I think it'll be received by different people in different ways. So the Nobel Prize Committee would reject any suggestion that they have made any kind of political decision in any of their choices for Nobel laureates. They talk about the centrality of the prose, the art, the literature. That's their only decision-making strategy. However, there has been global responses to her work, to her Nobel Prize win, and there will be, I'm sure, to her discussion of the need for peace and the fact that literature stands in opposition to all acts of brutality, killing or war. I know that there are lots of American responses suggesting that her Nobel win, for instance, is a kind of a recognition of South Korean resistance to any kinds of restrictions on freedom of speech, for instance. So lots of people will see her position, her current kind of global position, as being significant in responding to that. And I think with the publication of her new novel, people will start to see her in the UK and more globally as a political spokesperson and political novelist more than they do at the moment.
Yeah, so Jenny, you certainly made me want to pick up her novel, and hopefully all our viewers watching this interview as well. Thanks so very much for your insights. Jenny Ramone at Nottingham Trent University. Now, this year's Nobel Peace Prize laureates were honored in the Norwegian capital last night. Hundreds of people held a traditional torchlight parade to hail Japan's Nihon Hidankyo after the award ceremony in Oslo. The group represents survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. Representatives of the grassroots movement greeted the crowd from a hotel balcony, unfurling a banner with an image of a paper crane, a symbol of peace, and their decades-long campaign for the abolition of nuclear weapons.
I feel so empowered with all of these people who share this hope, who share this passion. We know we can do it. We are going to carry this torch for them.
It's been a truly lifelong commitment for some people and their families, because we should also remember that the hibakusha also include their children and their grandchildren. And that, if anything, underlines how terrible nuclear weapons are, is that this is a trauma that has lasted generations.
Nihon Hidankyo uses first-hand testimonies of the devastation and suffering to demonstrate why atomic weapons must never be used again. Well, the bombings in 1945 are the only times nuclear weapons have been used in armed conflict, killing more than 200,000 people.
原爆被害の現在の被害者の現在の平均年齢は85歳。10年先には直後の直接の被爆体験者としての証言ができるのは数人になるかもしれません。これからは私たちがやってきた運動を次の世代の皆さんが工夫して築いていくことを期待しております。
Coming up on East Asia tonight, we turn our focus to Thailand, where Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra is marking 90 days since she took office. You're watching East Asia Tonight on CNA, and we are back with some news outside of the region. Well, Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra is marking 3 months since her maiden policy address. Our Bangkok correspondent Saksit Sombat takes a look at her government's achievements so far.
Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin guilty of an ethics violation and removing him from office.
Thaksin Shinawatra has summoned the leader of all coalition parties to talk about what to do next.
Thai lawmakers have elected Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, the daughter of the ousted ex-leader Thaksin.
Thailand's second female prime minister took the helm after a whirlwind 72 hours in last August. A decade after her aunt Yingluck Shinawatra was ousted, Paetongtarn takes charge as Thailand's third prime minister from the Shinawatra family. The 38-year-old is a political novice. She's not officially held any political office before, but she carries a not insignificant challenge on her shoulders. She is leading a coalition of frenemies. Paetongtarn's governing Pheu Thai party didn't win enough seats in the elections last year. And so it had to form a power-sharing government with its rivals and past opponents of former Prime Minister Thaksin, her father and her party's unofficial patriarch. Unfamiliar and competitive territory for parties associated with Thaksin.
ในสมัยของการเป็นพรรคไทยรักไทยก็ดีพรรคพลังประชาชนก็ดีหรือว่าเพื่อไทยในก่อนหน้านี้ก็ดีนะครับการมีเสียงข้างมากที่เด็ดขาดในสภาเนี่ยทำให้การตัดสินใจการบริหารงานต่างๆในรัฐบาลก็ทำได้โดยง่ายแต่วันนี้พอไม่มีเสียงข้างมากที่เด็ดขาดเราจะเห็นได้ว่าหลายๆนโยบายต้องอาศัยการต่อรองอาศัยการพูดคุย
Her predecessor Srettha Thavisin focused on quick wins, policies that would win widespread support, such as reviving tourism arrivals and foreign investment to boost Thailand's slow-growing economy. And these are priorities Paetongtarn has continued in her government. On the to-do list, there's still some unfulfilled campaign promises. There is, for instance, the digital wallet cash handout policy. Sure, some Thais have already gotten their 10,000 baht or almost $300, but the majority of the 50 million eligible Thais, they're still waiting for their money. It is going to cost the government a total of $13 billion in an effort to boost consumption. It's expected to come sometime in 2025, which is a lot later than initially announced. Then there's the issue of household debt, which is weighing heavily on the Thai economy, almost 90% to the GDP. Having said that, there are already some measures on the way, such as the suspension of interest and the delayment of principal payment. So all in all, measures aimed to ease the burden to the people so they're not defaulting on their loans or credits. And then there are also some proposed political reforms, such as proposed amendments to the 2017 constitution. But it has turned out to be more laborious than they have hoped for, and every consensus with the other parties is a hard-fought one. There are some doubts whether or not we will get a new constitution before the next elections, sometime in 2027. But Thai politics operates not just in the halls of powers in Bangkok. These are the current battlefields for votes and favors. Normally, the election of a new chair for the provincial administration organization doesn't turn many heads. But here, in northeastern Udon Thani, the Pheu Thai party is bringing in the big guns. Thaksin is back on the campaign trail for the first time after returning for 15 years of self-exile. The 75-year-old was hospitalized during a short prison term for corruption. But being back at the front lines of politics appears to have rejuvenated his spirits.
ผมนี่นะเวลามาอยู่กับพี่น้องนี่มันเริ่มหนุ่มขึ้นอ่ะในฐานะเป็นอดีตนายกในฐานะเป็นหนี้บุญคุณพี่น้องประชาชนที่ไม่เคยลืมมา17ปีก็พร้อมที่จะใช้สมองช่วยประเทศเพื่อให้พี่น้องได้ฟื้นจากความยากลำบากจากที่ผ่านมา
ซึ่งตรงนี้ก็จะทำให้เกิดการเรียกคะแนนนิยมนะครับคือถ้าพูดภาษาง่ายเหมือนกลับไปฉายหนังซ้ำเดิมที่คุณทักษิณเคยประสบความสำเร็จมาก่อนในอดีตแล้วก็เอามาปรับปรุงเป็นภาพยนตร์คอฟเวอร์ในเวอร์ชั่นใหม่นะครับดังนั้นคุณทักษิณก็เลยต้องลงพื้นที่ในครั้งนี้นะครับ
It seemed to have worked. The candidate won the Udon Thani polls in late November, as have almost all Pheu Thai-backed prospects this year so far, with more local elections coming next year. Thaksin is expected to get involved more often, laying the groundwork for the next general election, which has to take place no later than 2027. Thaksin is bullish that this government will stick together until then.
ผมกล้าบอกในฐานะผู้สันทัดกรณีนักการเมืองมานานสังเกตรัฐบาลมานานทั้งล้มลุกคลุกคลานมานานผมยืนยันว่ารัฐบาลนี้อยู่ครบเทอม
Thaksin is seen to be tying his own legacy with his daughter's political success. But critics see his involvement as meddling and warn it could trigger his enemies to move against him and destabilize his daughter's government and take along Thai democracy as collateral damage. For now, the coalition partners are emphasizing the harmony within the cabinet since it was formed about 100 days ago.
Has been rather smooth, and our Prime Minister, she has been working well, around the clock really, and all the members of the cabinet have been cooperating very closely.
We have got along very well. We have common goals in bringing well-being to our people. So I think we are moving towards success on the promises that we have promised our people.
We put the same question to Prime Minister Paetongtarn. It's almost going to be 100 days that you have taken up office. How are you looking back at this time? How has your experience been so far?
I plan to have the event for telling the people what the government have done for the country. So just wait a little bit. We have the answer for that.
A few months isn't quite long enough to measure success. But in the years since the last elections, the economic challenges the country is facing are not getting any smaller, and neither are the expectations of the Thai people for the government to tackle them as promised. Saksit Sayasombat, CNA, Bangkok.
South Korea's Nokdu Street, known for its neon-lit alleys and crowds packing its pubs and bars in the evening, has seen better days. Well, many young people used to queue here for a table to end their days with mung bean pancakes and shots of the local rice wine known as makgeolli. But the street is now a shadow of its vibrant past. Even at peak hours, it's common to see near-empty establishments, and the thinning footfall is a concern to many businesses.
거리가 그냥 머리밖에 없어 까매. 길이 안 보여요. 머리만 까맣게 보일 정도로 사람이 많았어요. 경제도 문제가 있고 또 학생들이 술 먹는 문화가 옛날하고 달라요. 좀 바뀌었어요. 많이 안 먹어요.
Her observations are not far off. It is a change driven by a few factors. People are becoming more health conscious and they're reluctant to spend more due to persistent inflation and higher interest rates. Corporate Korea is also noticeably slowing down on post-work drinking known as hosik. Younger workers especially are rejecting these drunken sessions after a 2007 High Court ruling made it an offence to force subordinates to drink alcohol. An index measuring sales at local eateries fell to a record low last year, reflecting a broader slowdown in Asia's fourth largest economy. But an underlying shift in preference in the younger generation could also be at work.
맛집을 찾아다니거나 예쁜 카페 그리고 유명한 맛집들을 찾아가면서 술을 대체해서 맛있는 음식을 먹으면서 얘기를 나누는 그런 시간들이 많아졌던 것 같아요.
And the refs of East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And also find us on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for your company.